In this video, we'll create our first custom control, putting together what we've learned about paths and layers. Our final goal is to have a number of custom controls that we can choose from to make an app to narrow down office party venues. Our first office party took place at a surprise location. Unfortunately, clothing advisories weren't given, so our control will indicate what temperature the venue is expected to be, so that people can wear appropriate attire. This is how we'll put the control together. We'll start off with a circle. Then we'll add a line, and that will be our thermometer shape. We'll then add a thick line layer on top of that. I've made it red so that we can see it, but we'll change it to white for the final control. When we pan up and down on the control, this line will grow and shrink. Then we'll create another layer that's the same as the bottom layer, but a bit thinner. We'll use this layer to mask out the thick top layer, and that will be our finished control. So let's get started.
Open up thermometerview.swift. All the code for the custom control is going to go in here. We're going to have several layers. First of all, there will be a background shape layer that's the outline. That will be just a circle with a line sticking up. On top of that layer, we'll have another layer of the same shape that we can fill by dragging, and we'll use a pan gesture for that. So let's start by making a shape layer for the background. Create a function called setup. All the thermometer building can go in here. And we'll call this method FromAwakeFromNib, so it's called every time the thermometer is created. In setup, add thermolayer to the views layer. The bottom of the thermometer is going to be a circle the width of the view, and the top of the thermometer will be the line sticking up from this circle. The line will be the height of the view less the diameter of the circle, and the diameter of the circle will be the width of the view. So we'll create the circle first. And we'll set the shape layer's path and stroke the path with a dark grey. That 3 is trial and error to see what looks good. Build and run. And let's take a look at the circle. The line width makes the circle extend outside the view's bounds, so I'm going to reduce the width of the thermometer by the line width. And I'll move the layer over by half the line width so that it's going to be in the centre of the view. I'm tweaking some values here, but there's an easier way of checking up on progress when building up custom controls than running the app all the time, and that is using IBDesignable. All you have to do is mark your class as @IBDesignable, and you can automatically preview it in the storyboard. So I'll add IBDesignable to the class at the top, and I'll open up a preview storyboard and find the thermometer scene. We'll have a side-by-side view so we can have code and storyboard open at the same time. Hold down the Option key and click Thermometer View to open it in the Assistant Editor. As you can see, nothing is showing up yet, and that's because the storyboard doesn't call AwakeFromNib. The reason I created setup as a separate function was so that we can call a method that's specifically called from the storyboard, called prepare for interface builder. And now the storyboard should update with our circle magically. So we don't have to keep running the app to see what we're doing. We can just view it in the preview storyboard. If the storyboard doesn't update, restart Xcode because sometimes it misbehaves. Let's add the thermometer's upward line. And the storyboard updates with the line. Let's move that over a little bit. I want that to be curved at the end, so I'm going to put a line cap on it. This can be round or square. And you can see how quick and easy it is to design the control now. In the current version of Xcode, I actually find IB designable in storyboards easier than designing paths in playgrounds. The next thing we have to do for our thermometer is to add the top white layer. So we'll add a new property. And in Setup, add it to the layer tree. We could create a duplicate layer shape, but because we're going to be changing the level depending on a pan gesture, it's actually easier to create a thick line and change the length. And we can mask the thermometer shape out in a moment. I'll separate this building the level layer out into a new function. And call this function from Setup. In Build Level Layer, I'll create the path and create a line that goes through the middle of the window with its full height. And stroke the path with red so that we can see it. And give the level layer the path so that we can see what's happening. And there's our thin red line. So we'll make the line the whole width of the view. Currently the stroke is going from start to end. We can set a value for the start and end of the stroke between 0 and 1. The default start is 0 and the default end is 1. And we're going to use a pan gesture to change the stroke end. So I'll set up a property to hold the current end, and for the moment I'll set it halfway. And I'll set the stroke end to that level. And you can see that the stroke only goes halfway now. When in designing in a storyboard, it's useful to be able to test out different values. And also, if I were to reuse this control, I don't want to be diving inside the code to change the starting position. So I can set up a class property as IB inspectable so that I can change the value in the storyboard's attributes inspector. I just put IB inspectable in front of the property. And open up the Attributes Inspector. And I now have an attribute for level that I can change that will update my storyboard. The IB Inspectable attribute makes it very easy to test my control out with different values. And I can always make this a starting value for the app as well. So now let's add a pan gesture to the control. We're going to call this through a selector, which is an Objective-C concept. So this has to be a method visible to Objective-C, which we do with @objc. And I'll set the pan gesture up in Setup. Inside the pan gesture, we first work out how much the touch has moved and work out the percentage of the view's height. So if we have a translation in the Y down direction of 10 points and a view height of 100 points, the percentage will be 0.1. The Y translation will be negative going up and positive going down. So we need to take the percentage away from the current stroke end value. And we need to make sure that the value stays between 0 and 1, so I'll change this line to use max and min for checking. Here we take the smallest of 1 or the level, and the largest of 0 and this result. And we'll reset the translation at the end of the method. We can't test out gestures in the storyboard, unfortunately, so we'll build and run. And that looks fine. The bar stops at 0 and 1 at the top. But there's one thing that doesn't work properly. If you're following along, you can probably feel a lag. If I do a very quick gesture, the stroke level takes a fraction longer to catch up and the control doesn't feel responsive. And this is because we're activating the animation in the core animation layer. Anytime you change a CA layer value from its initial value, it could be the width or the position, or in this case the stroke end, core animation animates that value over a specific length of time. This is called implicit animation. We want to turn this animation off. So I'll surround setting the stroke end inside a CA layer transaction and disable the animation. Here I've added a core animation transaction and I've disabled implicit animation. I can now set any value on the CA layer and commit the transaction. If you want to know more about animating, then we do have a complete video course and a book on iOS animation. Build and run. And the control's now nice and responsive. All we have to do now is mask out the stroke so it's the same shape as the underlying thermometer shape. To do this, we add a mask layer that's exactly the same shape as the thermometer layer. So I'll add a new layer property. And I'll use the same path for the mask layer in setup and use the thermo layer properties. And temporarily, I'll add this as a sublayer so that we can see what's happening. So now we have a duplicate of the layer underneath. But instead of adding this layer, I'll change it to be the red level layer's mask. And now we have a cutaway of the red level layer. The gesture will still work, as we can tell using the attributes inspector. But let's pretty this up a bit. If I reduce the line width of the mask, it will show the bottom layer and give an edge. And if I remove the mask's fill color, then it'll show through to the bottom layer. The black is coming from the bottom layer, so I can change that color depending on where the level is. If it's halfway up, then we'll say the temperature is good, and if not, we'll mark it as wear lots of clothes. So here's where I set the level. So I'm going to test the value of the level to see whether it should be red or green. And we can test this on the Attributes Inspector again. And let's change that red to be white. And let's build and run to test the final control. Again, you can see that the color change has an implicit animation, which gives the color change a slight lag. I don't mind that here, but if you want to disable the animation, you can wrap the color assignment inside a CA transaction.